Uh, the reader Shilpi is going to come. Just give me a minute.
Should we begin?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Shilpi.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Good
We're
evening,
reading
ma'am.
from, yes, good evening. We're reading from page number 118, 118. The praise, the recognition that he received through getting one story in print changed his whole life. For if it hadn't been for that encouragement, he might have spent his entire life working in rat infested factories. You may have heard of that boy. His name was Charles Dickens. Another boy in London made his living as a clerk in a dry goods store. He had to get up at 5 o'clock, sweep out the store, and slave for 14 hours a day. It was sheer drudgery, and he despised it. After 2 years, he could stand it no longer, so he got up one morning and, without waiting for breakfast, tramped 15 miles to talk to his mother, who was working as a housekeeper. He was frantic. He pleaded with her. He wept. He swore he would kill himself if he had to remain in the shop any longer. Then he wrote a long, pathetic letter to his old schoolmaster, declaring that he was heartbroken, that he no longer wanted to live. His old schoolmaster gave him a little praise and assured him that he really was very intelligent and fitted for finer things, and offered him a job as a teacher. That praise changed the future of that boy and made a lasting impression on the history of English literature. For that boy went on to write innumerable best-selling books and made over $1 million with his pen. You've probably heard of him. His name is H.G. Wells. Use of praise instead of criticism is the basic concept of B.F. Skinner's teachings. This great contemporary psychologist has shown by experiments with animals and with humans that when criticism is minimized and praise emphasized, the good things people do will be reinforced and the poorer things will atrophy for lack of attention. John Ringlespaw of Rocky Mount, North Carolina, used this in dealing with his children. It seemed that, as in so many families, mother and dad's chief form of communication with the children was yelling at them. And in so many cases, the children became a little worse rather than better after each such session. And so did the parents. There seemed to be no end in sight for this problem. Mr. Ringelspaw determined to use some of the principles he was learning in our course to solve this situation. He reported. We decided to try praise instead of harping on their faults. It wasn't easy when we all could see were the when all we could see were the negatives they were doing. It was really tough to find things to praise. We managed to find something, and within the first day or two, some of the really upsetting things they were doing quit happening. Then some of their other faults began to disappear. They began capitalizing on the praise we were giving them. They even began going out of their way to do things right. Neither of us could believe it. Of course, it didn't last forever, but the norm reached after things leveled off was so much better. It was no longer necessary to react the way we used to. The children were doing far more right things than wrong ones. All of this was a result of praising the slightest improvement in the children rather than condemning everything they did wrong. This works on the job too. Keith Roper of Woodland Hills, California, applied this principle to the situation in his company. Some material came to him in his print shop, which was of exceptionally high quality. The printer who had done this job was a new employee who had been having difficulty adjusting to the job. His supervisor was upset about what he considered a negative attitude and was seriously thinking of terminating his services. When Mr. Roper was informed of this situation, he personally went over to the print shop and had a talk with the young man. He told him how pleased he was with the work he had just received and pointed out it was the best work he had seen produced in the shop for some time. He pointed out exactly why it was superior and how important the young man's contribution was to the company. Do you think this affected that young printer's attitude toward the company? Within days, there was a complete turnabout. He told several of his co workers about the conversation and how someone in the company really appreciated good work. And from that day on, he was a loyal and dedicated worker. What Mr. Roper did was not just flatter the young printer and say, "You're good." He specifically pointed out how his work was superior because he had singled out a specific accomplishment rather than just making general flattering remarks. His praise became much more meaningful to the person to whom it was given. Everybody likes to be praised, but when praise is specific, it comes across as sincere, not something the other person may be saying just to make one feel good. Remember, we all crave appreciation and recognition and will do almost anything to get it. But nobody wants insincerity. Nobody wants flattery. Let me repeat, the principles taught in this book will work only when they come from the heart. I am not advocating a bag of tricks. I am talking about a new way of life. Talk about changing people. If you and I will inspire the people with whom we come in contact to a realization of the hidden treasures they possess, we can do far more than change people. We can literally transform them. Exaggeration? Then listen to these sage words from William James, one of the most distinguished psychologists and philosophers America has ever produced. Compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. We are making use of only a small part of our physical and mental resources. Stating the thing broadly, the human individual thus lives far within his limits. He possesses powers of various sorts which he habitually fails to use. Yes, who are reading these lines possess powers of various sorts which you habitually fail to use. And one of these powers you're probably not using to the fullest extent is your magic ability to praise people and inspire them with a realization of their latent possibilities, abilities wither under criticism. They blossom under encouragement. To become a more effective leader of people, apply Principle 6. Praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. Chapter 28. Give a God give give a dog a good name. Give a dog a good name. What do you do when a person who has been a good worker begins to turn in shoddy work? You can fire him or her, but that really doesn't solve anything. You can berate the worker, but this usually causes resentment. Henry Henk, a service manager for a large truck dealership in Lowell, Indiana, had a mechanic whose work had become less than satisfactory. Instead of bawling him out or threatening him, Mr. Hank called him into his office and had a heart to heart talk with him. "Bill," he said, "you are a fine mechanic. You have been in this line of work for a good number of years. You have repaired many vehicles to the customer's satisfaction. In fact, we've had a number of compliments about the good work you have done. Yet, of late, the time you take to complete each job has been increasing, and your work has not been up to your own old standards. Because you have been such an outstanding mechanic in the past, I felt sure you would want to know that I'm not happy with this situation, and perhaps jointly we could find some way to correct the problem. Bill responded that he hadn't realized he had been falling down in his duties and assured his boss that the work he was getting was not out of his range of expertise and he would try to improve in the future. Did he do it? You can be sure he did. He once again became a fast and thorough mechanic. With that reputation Mr. Hanks had given him to live up to, how could he do anything else but turn out work comparable to that which he had done in the past? The average person, said Samuel Wauquelin, then president of the Baldwin Locomotive Works, can be led readily if you have his or her respect and if you show that you respect that person for some kind of ability. In short, if you want to improve a person in a certain aspect, act as though that particular trait were already one of his or her outstanding characteristics. Shakespeare said, assume a virtue if you have it not. And it might be well to assume and state openly that other people have the virtue you want them to develop. Give them a fine reputation to live up to, and they will make prodigious efforts rather than you see you disillusioned. Georgette Leblanc, in her book Souvenirs, My Life with Maeterlinck, describes the startling transformation of a humble Belgian Cinderella. A servant girl from a neighboring hotel brought my meals, she wrote. She was called Mary the dishwasher because she had started her career as a scullery assistant. She was a kind of monster, cross eyed, bandy legged, poor in flesh and spirit. One day, while she was holding my plate of macaroni in her red hand, I said to her point blank, Mary, you do not know what treasures are within you. Accustomed to holding back her emotion, Mary waited for a few moments, not daring to risk the slightest gesture of fear of a catastrophe. Then she put the dish on the table, sighed, and said ingenuously, Madam, I would never have believed it. She did not doubt. She did not ask a question. She simply went back to the kitchen and repeated what I had said, and such is the force of faith that no one made fun of her. From that day on, she was even given a certain consideration. But the most curious change of all occurred in the humble Mary herself. Believing she was the tabernacle of unseen marvels, she began taking care of her face and body so carefully that her starved youth seemed to bloom and modestly hide her plainness. 2 months later, she announced her coming marriage with the nephew of the chef. I'm going to be a lady, she said, and thanked me. A small phrase had changed her entire life. Georgette Leblanc had given Mary the dishwasher a reputation to live up to, and that reputation had transformed her. Bill Parker, a sales representative for a food company in Daytona Beach, Florida, was very excited about the new line of products his company was introducing and was upset when the manager of a large independent food market turned down the opportunity to carry it in his store. Bill brooded all day over his rejection and decided to return to the store before he went home that evening and try again. Jack, he said, since I left this morning, I realized I hadn't given you the entire picture of our new line, and I would appreciate some of your time to tell you about the points I omitted. I have respected the fact that you are always willing to listen and are big enough to change your mind when the facts warrant a change. Could Jack refuse to give him another hearing? Not with that reputation to live up to. One morning, Dr. Martin Fitzhugh, a dentist in Dublin, Ireland, was shocked when one of his patients pointed out to him that the metal cup holder which she was using to rinse her mouth was not very clean. True, the patient drank from the paper cup, not the holder, but it was certainly was It certainly was not professional to use tarnished equipment. When the patient left, Dr. Fitzhugh retreated to his private office to write a note to Bridget, the charwoman who came twice a week to clean his office. He wrote, "My dear Bridget, I see you so seldom. I thought I'd take time to thank you for the fine job of cleaning you've been doing. By the way, I thought I'd mention that since 2 hours twice a week is a very limited amount of time, please feel free to work an extra half an hour from time to time if you feel you need to do those once in a while things like polishing the cup holders and the like. I, of course, will pay you for the extra time." The next day, when I walked into my office, Dr. Fitzhugh reported my desk had been polished to a mirror like finish, as had my chair, which I nearly slid out of. When I went into the treatment room, I found the shiniest, cleanest chrome plated cup holder I had ever seen nestled in its receptacle. I had given my charwoman a fine reputation to live up to, and because of this small gesture, she outperformed all her past efforts. How much additional time did she spend on this? That's right, none at all. There's an old saying: give a dog a bad name, and you may as well hang him. But give him a good name and see what happens. Then Mr. Ruth Hopkins, a fourth grade teacher in Brooklyn, New York, looked at her class roster. That first day of school, her excitement and joy of starting a new term was tinged with anxiety. In her class this year, she would have Tommy T, the school's most notorious bad boy. His third grade teacher had constantly complained about Tommy to colleagues, the principal, and anyone else who would listen. He was not just mischievous, he caused serious discipline problems in the class, picked fights with the boys, teased the girls, was fresh to the teacher, and seemed to get worse as he grew older. His only redeeming feature was his ability to learn rapidly and master the schoolwork easily. Mrs. Hopkins decided to face the Tommy problem immediately. When she greeted her new students, she made little comments to each of them. "Rose, that's a pretty dress you're wearing. Alicia, I hear you draw beautifully." When she came to Tommy, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "Tommy, I understand you are a natural leader. I'm going to depend on you to help me make this class the best class in fourth grade this year." She reinforced this over the first few days by complimenting Tommy on everything he did and commenting on how this showed what a good student he was. With that reputation to live up to, even a 9-year-old couldn't let her down, and he didn't. If you want to excel in that difficult leadership role of changing the attitude or behavior of others, use Principle 7. Sorry. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Chapter 29. Make the fault seem easy to correct. A bachelor friend of mine, about 40 years old, became engaged, and his fiancée persuaded him to take some belated dancing lessons. "The Lord knows I needed dancing lessons," he confessed as he told me the story. "For I danced just as I did when I first started 20 years ago. The first teacher I engaged probably told me the truth. She said I was all wrong. I would just have to forget everything and begin all over again. But that took the heart out of me. I had no incentive to go on. So I quit her. The next teacher may have been lying, but I liked it. She said nonchalantly that my dancing was a bit old fashioned, perhaps, but the fundamentals were all right. And she assured me I wouldn't have any trouble learning a few new steps. The first teacher had discouraged me by emphasizing my mistakes. This new teacher did the opposite. She kept praising the things I did right and minimizing my errors. "You have a natural sense of rhythm," she assured me. "You really are a natural born dancer." Now, my common sense tells me that I always have been and always will be a fourth-rate dancer. Yet, deep in my heart, I still like to think that maybe she meant it. To be sure, I was paying her to say it, but why bring that up? At any rate, I know I'm a better dancer than I would have been if she hadn't told me I had a natural sense of rhythm. That encouraged me, that gave me hope, that made me want to improve. Tell your child, your spouse, or your employee that he or she is stupid or dumb at a certain thing, has no gift for it, and is doing it all wrong, and you have destroyed almost every incentive to try to improve. But use the opposite technique. Be liberal with your encouragement. Make the thing seem easy to do. Let the other person know that you have faith in his ability to do it, that he has an undeveloped faith for flair for it, and he will practice until the dawn comes in the window in order to excel. Lowell Thomas, a superb artist in human relations, used this technique. He gave you confidence, inspired you with courage and faith. For example, I spent a weekend with Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, and on Saturday night, I was asked to sit in on a friendly bridge game before a roaring fire. Bridge? Oh no, 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 not me. I knew nothing about it. The game had always been a black mystery to me. No, no, impossible. Why, Dale? It is no trick at all, Lowell replied. There's nothing to bridge except memory and judgment. You have written articles in memory. Bridge will be a cinch for you. It's right up your alley. And presto, almost before I realized what I was doing, I found myself for the first time at a bridge table. All because I was told I had a natural flair for it, and the game was made to seem easy. Speaking of bridge reminds me of Ellie Culbertson, whose books on bridge have been translated into a dozen languages and have sold more than 1 million copies. Yet he told me he never would have made a profession out of the game if a certain young woman hadn't assured him he had a flair for it. When he came to America in 1922, he tried to get a job teaching in philosophy and sociology, but he couldn't. Then he tried selling coal, and he failed at that. Then he tried selling coffee, and he failed at that too. He had played some bridge, but it had never occurred to him in those days that someday he would teach it. He was not only a poor card player, but he was also very stubborn. He asked so many questions and held so many post-mortem examinations that no one wanted to play with him. Then he met a pretty bridge teacher, Josephine Dillon, fell in love and married her. She noticed how carefully he analyzed his cards and persuaded him that he was a potential genius at the card table. It was that encouragement and that alone, Culbertson told me, that caused him to make a profession of bridge. Clarence M. Jones, one of the instructors of our course in Cincinnati, Ohio, told how encouragement and making faults seem easy to correct completely changed the life of his son. In 1970, my son David, who was then 15 years old, came to live with me in Cincinnati. He had led a rough life. In 1958, his head was cut open in a car accident, leaving a very bad scar on his forehead. In 1960, his mother and I were divorced, and he moved to Dallas, Texas with his mother. Until he was 15, he had spent most of his school years in special classes for slow learners in the Dallas school system. Possibly because of the scar, school administrators had decided he was brain injured and could not function at a normal level. He was 2 years behind his age group, so he was only in the seventh grade. Yet, he did not know his multiplication tables, added on his fingers, and could barely read. There was one positive point. He loved to work on radio and TV sets. He wanted to become a TV technician. I encouraged this and pointed out that he needed math to qualify for the training. I decided to help him become proficient in this subject. We obtained 4 sets of flashcards: multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. As we went through the cards, we put the correct answers in a discard stack. When David missed one, I gave him the correct answer and then put the card in the repeat stack until there were no cards left. I made a big deal out of each card he got right, particularly if he had missed it previously. Each night, we would go through the repeat stack until there were no cards left. Each night, we timed the exercise with a stopwatch. I promised him that when he could get all the cards correct in 8 minutes with no incorrect answers, we would quit doing it every night. This seemed an impossible goal to David. The first night, it took 52 minutes. The second night, 48, then 45, 44, 41, then under 40 minutes. We celebrated each reduction. I'd call in my wife, and we would both hug him, and we'd all dance a jig. At the end of the month, he was doing all the cards perfectly in less than 8 minutes. When he made a small improvement, he would ask to do it again. He had made the fantastic discovery that learning was easy and fun. Naturally, his grades in algebra took a jump. It is amazing how much easier algebra is when you can multiply. He astonished himself by bringing home a B in math. That had never happened before. Other changes came with almost unbelievable rapidity. His reading improved rapidly, and he began to use his natural talents in drawing. Later in the school year, his science teacher assigned him to develop an exhibit. He chose to develop a highly complex series of models to demonstrate the effect of levers. It required skill not only in drawing and model making, but in applied mathematics. The exhibit took first prize in his school's science fair and was entered in the city competition and won third prize for the entire city of Cincinnati. That did it. Here was a kid who had flunked 2 grades, who had been told he was brain damaged, who had been called Frankenstein by his classmates and told his brains must have leaked out of the cut on his head. Suddenly, he discovered he could really learn and accomplish things. The result, from the last quarter of the 8th grade all the way through high school, he never failed to make the honor roll. In high school, he was elected the National Honor Society. Once he found learning was easy, his whole life changed. If you want to help others to improve, remember Principle 8: use encouragement. Make the fault seem easy to correct. Chapter 30: Making people glad to do what you want. Back in 1915, America was aghast. For more than a year, the nations of Europe had been slaughtering one another on a scale never before dreamed of in all the bloody annals of mankind. Could peace be brought about? No one knew, but Woodrow Wilson was determined to try. He would send a personal representative, a peace emissary, to counsel with the warlords of Europe. William Jennings Bryan, Secretary of State, Bryan, the peace advocate, longed to go. He saw a chance to perform a great service and make his name immortal. But Wilson appointed another man, his intimate friend and an advisor, Colonel Edward M. House. And it was House's thorny task to break the unwelcome news to Bryan without giving him offense. Bryan was distinctly disappointed when he heard I was to go to Europe as the peace emissary. Colonel House records in his diary. He said he had planned to do this himself. I replied that the president thought it would be unwise for anyone to do this officially, and that his going would attract a great deal of attention and that people would wonder why he was there. You see the intimation? House practically told Bryan that he was too important for the job, and Bryan was satisfied. Colonel House, adroit, experienced in the ways of the world, was following one of the important rules of human relations. Always make the other person happy about doing the things you suggest. Woodrow Wilson followed that policy even when inviting William Gibbs McAdoo to become a member of his cabinet. That was the highest honor he could confer upon anyone. And yet, Wilson extended the invitation in such a way as to make McAdoo feel doubly important. Here's the story in McAdoo's own words. He, Wilson, said that he was making up his cabinet and that he would be very glad if I would accept a place in it as secretary of the treasury. He had a delightful way of putting things. He created the impression that by accepting this great honor, I would be doing him a favor. Unfortunately, Wilson didn't always employ such taught. If he had, history might have been different. For example, Wilson didn't make the Senate and the Republican Party happy by entering the United States in the League of Nations. Wilson refused to take such prominent Republican leaders as Elihu Root or Charles Evans Hughes or Henry Cabot Lodge to the peace conference with him. Instead, he took along unknown men from his own party. He snubbed the Republicans, refused to let them feel that the League was their idea as well as his, refused to let them have a finger in the pie, and as a result of this crude handling of human relations, wrecked his own career, ruined his health, shortened his life, caused America to stay out of the League, and altered the history of the world. Statesmen and diplomats aren't the only ones who use this make a person happy you do things you want them to do approach. Dale O'Ferrier of Fort Wayne, Indiana, told how he encouraged one of his young children to willingly do the chore he was assigned. One of Jeff's chores was to pick up pears from under the pear tree so the person who was mowing underneath wouldn't have to stop to pick them up. He didn't like this chore, and frequently it was either not done at all or it was done so poorly that the mower had to stop and pick up several pears that he had missed. Rather than have an eyeball to eyeball confrontation about it, one day I said to him, Jeff, I'll make a deal with you. For every bushel basket full of pears you pick up, I'll pay you $1. But after you're finished, for every pear I find left in the yard, I'll take away $1. How does that sound? As you would expect, he not only picked up all the pears, but I had to keep an eye on him to see that he didn't pull a few off the trees to fill up some of the baskets. I knew a man who had to refuse many invitations to speak, invitations extended by friends, invitations coming from people to whom he was obligated, and yet he did it so adroitly that the other person was at least contented with his refusal. How did he do it? Not by merely talking about the fact that he was too busy and too this and too that. No, after expressing his appreciation for the invitation and regretting his inability to accept it, he suggested a substitute speaker. In other words, he didn't give the other person any time to feel unhappy about the refusal. He immediately changed the other person's thoughts to some other speaker who could accept the invitation. Gunter Schmidt, who took our course in West Germany, told of an employee in the food store he managed who was negligent about putting the proper price tags on the shelves where the items were displayed. This caused confusion and customer complaints. Reminders, admonitions, confrontations with her about this did not do much good. Finally, Mr. Schmidt called her into his office and told her he was appointing her supervisor of price tag posting for the entire store, and she would be responsible for keeping all the shelves properly tagged. This new responsibility and title changed her attitude completely, and she fulfilled her duties satisfactorily from then on. Childish? Perhaps. But that is what they said to Napoleon when he created the Legion of Honor and distributed 15,000 crosses to his soldiers and made 18 of his generals marshals of France and called his troops the Grand Army. Napoleon was criticized for giving toys to war-hardened veterans, and Napoleon replied, men are ruled by toys. This technique of giving titles and authority worked for Napoleon, and it will work for you. For example, a friend of mine, Mrs. Ernest Gent of Scottsdale, New York, was troubled by boys running across and destroying her lawn. She tried criticism, she tried coaxing, neither worked. Then she tried giving the worst sinner in the gang a title and a feeling of authority. She made him her detective and put him in charge of keeping all trespassers off her lawn. That solved her problem. Her detective built a bonfire in the backyard, heated an iron red hot, and threatened to brand any boy who stepped on the lawn. The effective leader should keep the following guidelines in mind when it is necessary to change attitudes or behavior. Be sincere. Do not promise anything that you cannot deliver. Forget about the benefits to yourself and concentrate on the benefits to the other person. Know exactly what it is you want the other person to do. 3. Be empathetic. Ask yourself what is it the other person really wants. 4. Consider the benefits that person will receive from doing what you suggest. 5. Match those benefits to the other person's wants. 6. When you make your request, put it in a form that will convey to the other person the idea that he personally will benefit. He could give a curt order like this: John, we have customers coming in tomorrow and I need the stock room cleaned out. So sweep it out, put the stock in neat piles on the shelves and polish the counter. Or we could express the same idea by showing John the benefits he will get from doing the task. John, we have a job that should be completed right away. If it is done now, we won't be faced with it later. I'm bringing some customers in tomorrow to show our facilities. I would like to show them the stockroom, but it is in poor shape. If you could sweep it out, put the stock in neat piles on the shelves, and polish the counter, it would make us look efficient and you will have done your part to provide a good company image. Will John be happy about doing what you suggest? Probably not very happy, but happier than if you had not pointed out the benefits. Assuming you know that John has pride in the way his stockroom looks and is interested in contributing to the company image, he'll be more likely to be cooperative. It also will have been pointed out to John that the job would have to be done eventually, and by doing it now, he won't be faced with it later. It is naive to believe you will always get a favorable reaction from other persons when you use these approaches. But the experience of most people shows that you are more likely to change attitudes this way than by not using these principles. And if you increase your success by even a mere 10%, you have become 10% more effective as a leader than you were before. And that is your benefit. People are more likely to do what you would like them to do when you use Principle 9. Make the other person happy about doing the things you suggest. In a nutshell, be a leader. A leader's job often includes changing your people's attitudes and behavior. Some suggestions to accomplish this. Principle 1. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. Principle 2. Call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Principle 3. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Principle 4. Ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Principle 5. Let the other person save face. Principle 6. Praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. Principle 7. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Principle 8. Use encouragement. Make the fault seen easy to correct. Principle 9. Make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. I think we will stop here. Yes. So would any of you like to share? Sorry, Chandrasekhar, I just saw your message. I hope you could find out the chapter. The reading.
Yes, ma'am, I got you. Hello, ma'am, audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. Here in this chapter, I take away this point you said. Make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggested. These principles and other eight principles also. As use the encouragement, the make this fault seem easy to correct.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share?
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
If the fact principle number principle 8, use encouragement to make the fault seem easy to correct. I think so. That is really very nice thing. Like it is very easy to point at mistakes, but making how to improve the mistake. If you are not told about that, then it becomes very difficult. And if you use words of encouragement, this is the way, or suggest something that this is the way you could have done better. So that always makes things easier. And the faults also, you feel like correcting them. If you are always said you're not good for anything, or you cannot do this thing well, you did not do this right, it becomes very difficult. And give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. This so always works with any person. Like anytime if you give a person that this is something that you have always been doing so well and you're not doing it now, so that person always feels that yes, I have to live up to my reputation and I'll have to improve myself. There is no two ways about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing.
Good night.
Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Would anyone else like to share? So I think we'll call it a day. We'll see you tomorrow. Yeah.
Yes, Shilpi. Thank you so much. It was a lovely reading. It took me to a completely different time, and I enjoyed it every minute of it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Wonderful. Yes. Good night.
Night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.